Do you believe that change is difficult? Or do you believe that change is easy? I think that I often hear people talk about the fact that change is difficult, and then you kind of get stuck in that if you feel that change is difficult, then you won't go and do hard things necessarily, so then you won't do the change, whatever you think that is. But if you think about the idea of change being a constant, which is something, I believe it was Heraclitus that said, and I guess he said it first, lots of people probably said it, that change is constant, or change is the only constant. So if change is the only constant and it's happening all the time, it's happening right now. So you, as you're listening to this, are changing. You may not realize it because it's incremental. It's little by little. And if you really think about it, what keeps us thinking that we are not changing? And it's kind of this illusion that our mind creates for us. Because if you think about all of the things that science says, you are made of cells that grow and then they replicate and then eventually they die. They just die off at different rates. So I think it's a period of like 7 years or so where every single cell in your body has changed completely from 7 years ago. If you are over 7 years old, that means you're just constantly changing because at some point you're just adding on new cells that didn't exist 7 years ago, and you're just completely different. It's just this continual process. So if our bodies are always changing, but we're looking at it as completely static, that could be part of the reason why when we think about making physical changes, that we think that it's so difficult. So, for example, losing weight or building muscle, those types of things take time. And if you think about the fact that it takes 7 years for every single cell in your body to change, it's not that it's going to take you 7 years to get in shape or feel better physically. It just will take some time. So putting that into perspective and to give yourself some grace, the space to just continue to do those one little things over and over, right? Thinking about the idea of fractals, the smallest kind of unit that you can repeat over and over again will turn into these big, wonderful, complex things. So even if you were just to do something little, like, I don't know, like 5 push-ups or some kind of exercise, if you're doing that consistently, it really adds up. So from a physical perspective, the science says we change. The science says that, our cells turn over and eventually we're just made of completely different material, which is pretty cool. So then what about the rest of us in terms of our experience, in terms of our minds, right? Like this idea of self, is it fixed? Is it really fixed? Do you feel like you're the same person that you were 5 years ago? Even 1 year ago? Do you remember what that was like? You probably had different thoughts and feelings, likes, dislikes, potentially. You might have gained more or grown in some way where you've learned something new or you've found a new favorite thing. And because you've changed now, the idea of this fixed mind, kind of like the idea that you have a brain that contains your mind and that because it's your brain, it just kind of stays static, is an interesting thought. I don't know if it makes sense if you really think about it, because you can't measure, you can't prove, scientifically speaking, that your mind comes from your brain. You can correlate that you have electrical activity and correlate it to certain thoughts, but the correlation doesn't mean that it's causation. And that's a pretty standard kind of thing that gets forgotten, that when we see there's a correlation, it's very easy to say one thing causes the other thing. And it could just be a matter that the relationship is backwards. Because if you look at things like human design, talking about how we have energy centers that receive energy, when that happens, the idea that we generate thoughts kind of makes less sense. If we are a vessel to receive, then the thoughts are external and we're receiving them and then noticing them. And that's our awareness. Even if you go look into some of the Buddhist teachings, they say that there are 6 senses. The 5 that we're familiar with, that we commonly think about, and then there's the mind as a sense. So just like your eyes receive light and your ears receive sound waves and all of these things, the mind receives thoughts. And if you look at it from that perspective, that you're receiving these thoughts, then you might wonder why it is that sometimes you just focus on specific thoughts. They just seem to come up over and over and over again. And in some ways, I would think of it like, because you've had a certain thought, it made you feel a certain way, and likely at some point in your life, those thoughts and feelings were important for your own survival. Now that you're in a different space, sometimes it gets confusing to feel a thought and then not have that next associated thing that you need to be protected from. Or situations that you are presented with kind of help you reactivate those fears. And this is kind of like how our nervous system receives and sometimes gets activated or triggered by different ideas and situations. And if you think for a moment about that idea of receiving and having an external source of your thoughts, your feelings, your worries, your anxieties, what that means is that you have a choice of what you'd like to observe. It's almost like if you were looking in a specific direction, you would have a limited visual perspective. You're missing everything that's behind you. So if you think about your mind, your thoughts as a sense, and that you're directing it, if you direct it in the places where you've always pointed your mind to receive, you're going to continue to receive the same thing. So if you were to pull back and take control of your attention to move it into a different direction and look at something different, what would change? It's curious, and it sometimes sounds very difficult to do something like that, to just stop feeling one way and stop thinking one thing and think about something else. Well, the first part of it, of like stopping to think about something, is difficult because you have to negate something, you have to think about it to get rid of it. So then it's almost, you have to be ready to let go of that thought, to put it down, so that you can just look in a different direction. So I think that's the missing piece. You may become aware of the feelings, the anxieties, the fears, the worries that you don't like. And until you can accept that and say, yes, I am experiencing this right now. This is my experience and it's okay. And I accept that I'm having this. When you're okay with having something, then you in some ways take ownership over it. And then you begin to, you're then better able to affect it, which is to say you can put it down without it affecting you. So then if you think about accepting the thoughts and the feelings that you don't like, accepting it as yourself and saying, yeah, I'm carrying this around and this is mine and I can experience it. And at the same time, I can set it aside. It's okay that I feel this way. And now that I'm okay with feeling that way, I can set it down for a moment and decide what to feel now. Thinking about literally anything else. And if you're thinking back to that idea of receiving thoughts, could you imagine that all the thoughts are just available to you? And if you took a moment to pause and quiet the mind and just observe really the thoughts that are floating around you, then you can decide which ones to focus on. If you thought of it as floating around you, you could let those ones that are less desirable just float away, and you could look and choose to direct your attention with your intention.